Then I looked, and there was the Lamb, and with him were 144,000 people who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. That is one of the most mysterious passages from the book of Revelation, which is already arguably one of the most mysterious books in the New Testament. It's packed with beasts, dragons, cosmic battles, and a lot of symbolic numbers. The number 7 pops up constantly. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 churches, and in the Hebrew Bible, 7 often symbolizes perfection or completeness, which is why it so often gets tied to the divine. But Revelation also leans heavily on another symbolic number, 12, which also symbolizes wholeness and divine authority. Think the 12 tribes of Israel descended from the 12 sons of Jacob, or the 12 disciples chosen by Jesus. Revelation draws on the symbolism by introducing this striking figure of 144,000 people. That's 12 times 12 times 1,000. These 144,000 people show up in 2 key moments, Revelation chapter 7 and chapter 14, where they're described as being sealed by God, marked for salvation. But who exactly are these 144,000? Are we supposed to take that number literally, or is it symbolic like so much of this book? This mysterious group of 144,000 people has sparked centuries of speculation, from early Christian theologians all the way up to 21st century prophecy fiction, each offering very different interpretations of who the 144,000 really are. Okay, so let's take a closer look at where the 144,000 actually appear in Revelation. In Revelation 7, the author describes a vision of 4 angels standing at the corners of the earth, each one representing one of the 4 cardinal directions. These 4 angels are told to hold back the destructive winds from the earth until we have marked the servants of our God with a seal on their foreheads. John then hears the number of those who are sealed, 144,000, drawn evenly from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each tribe. These people are marked with a seal, which we'll unpack more in a moment. The 144,000 show up again in Revelation chapter 14, which I quoted at the start. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb, and with him were 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. And they sing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. They have been redeemed from humankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found. They are blameless. So the 144,000 are depicted as a group divinely marked with a seal, who can sing a song only they can learn, and they follow the Lamb with complete devotion, set apart from the rest of humanity for a special role in God's end-time plan. Oh, and they don't have sex. More on that in a bit. Revelation 14:1 says that the 144,000 have the name of the Lamb, Jesus, and the name of his Father inscribed on their foreheads. In chapter 7, this inscription is referred to in Greek as a seal, or sphraghis. And it carried a very specific meaning back then, to mark ownership or authority. You'd seal letters, legal documents, or even property with a unique symbol to show who it belonged to and who had authorized it. Those seals also feature prominently in rituals involving supernatural protection. The scholar David Frankfurter points out that the idea of sealing one's forehead draws directly from a striking scene in the Hebrew Bible, in Ezekiel chapter 9. In that vision, God commands an angel to go through Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of everyone who stood against the defilement of the temple. The word translated here for mark in Ezekiel is simply tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which in its ancient Paleo-Hebrew form looked kind of like an English X. Only those bearing this mark would survive the slaughter by God's avenging angels. So in both Ezekiel and Revelation, we find the same core idea: God marking out his faithful for protection before judgment falls. In other words, the mark is apotropaic, which means it's meant to protect you from supernatural evil or harm in general. In fact, Revelation's image of believers sealed on the forehead taps into a much broader tradition of the protective powers of seals found in ancient Jewish, Christian, and Greco-Roman magic. Seals inscribed with divine names were widely used in the ancient world to protect the bearer from harm, especially during encounters with demons or spiritual forces during heavenly ascents. The idea of the protective power of seals shows up in Greek magical handbooks from Roman Egypt, as well as apocalyptic texts like the Ascension of Isaiah and Hekhalot literature, and even in some Gnostic texts like the books of Jehu, which include diagrams for drawing protective seals. Ancient Jewish and Christian amulets sometimes explicitly call themselves seals, like this amulet, which is inscribed with the words Seal of Solomon. This idea can also be connected to the golden headplate of the Israelite high priest in the book of Exodus, which was inscribed with the words, "Holy to the Lord," which may have served as an early model of sacred protection and could have influenced Revelation's imagery of divine sealing on the forehead. So who exactly are these 144,000 people who received this protective seal? According to the scholar Adela Yarbrough Collins, they probably are not meant to represent all Christians. For one thing, the number is very specific and limited, 144,000, rather than something more inclusive like everyone who believes. And more importantly, they seem to be clearly distinguished from another group mentioned just a few verses later in Revelation 7:9, a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. This great multitude seems to represent people drawn from all nations, unlike the highly specific tribal breakdown of the 144,000. Remember, this group is composed of 12,000 people drawn from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Dr. Collins also notes something curious about that song the 144,000 people sing. We never actually hear the lyrics, which is unusual since Revelation does quote several hymns throughout the book. But here we're told that only the 144,000 can learn this song. No one else. That detail reinforces the idea that this group is meant to be exclusive, a group marked out as different even from the broader community of Christians. What's especially interesting is how John uses this number to contrast this elite group with the followers of the beast, who are also sealed with a mark. In Revelation 13, the beast marks his followers with the number 666, putting this mark on their right hands or their foreheads, while in Revelation 14, the 144,000 are said to have the name of the Lamb and of God written on their foreheads. But the language used for these markings is deliberately different. The 144,000 are marked with a sragis, which, as we've seen, is a term linked with divine protection. But the followers of the beast are marked with a charagma, a word more commonly used for branding horses or an imperial stamp on a coin. This charagma does not protect them from divine judgment. It marks them as insiders within an alternative economy and political system, granting them the right to buy and sell. Dr. Frankfurter sees this as an intentional parody, a false seal that mimics the real one but reverses its meaning and purpose. So the author of Revelation is setting these two groups in parallel. One is sealed with divine identity and the other branded with a distorted number. Other scholars have pointed out that there's symbolism with the number 666, which obviously is based on the number 6, half of 12, symbolically falling short of a divine number. Meanwhile, 144,000 is 12 squared times 1,000. Suggesting not only fullness, but overwhelming magnitude. Scholars have argued that this contrast between these two numbers gives the impression that belonging to the beast is a distorted and diminished version of belonging to the Lamb. So John's use of symbolic numbers draws sharp lines between those loyal to Jesus and those loyal to the beast. But it's not just the numbers that distinguishes this group. It's also their sexual practices, or lack thereof. Revelation 14:4 says that the 144,000 are those who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. This detail adds another layer to their exclusivity, but what's the deal with the celibacy? Why would sexual abstinence be part of what sets this group apart? Scholars have argued that this idea of celibacy is linked to battle readiness. In several instances in the Hebrew Bible, warriors needed to observe strict purity laws before going to war, and Revelation seems to echo that tradition. For instance, in Deuteronomy 23, God instructs the Israelite army, "When you're encamped against your enemies, you shall guard against every evil thing. If one of you becomes unclean because of a nocturnal emission, then he shall go outside the camp. When evening comes, he shall wash himself and may come back into the camp." John seems to be drawing on a similar idea. Ceremonial purity should be observed before battle as a symbol for the moral purity that Christians will need to resist the seductions of Roman luxury and idolatry. The scholar David Oney argues that the 144,000 may represent a kind of war census, modeled after texts like Numbers 31. In this passage, Moses tells each of Israel's 12 tribes to supply 1,000 soldiers to fight the Midianites. Revelation chapter 7 amplifies this, calling for 12 times that number, signaling that the final battle will be vastly more cosmic in scale. Scholars have also drawn a parallel with the War Scroll, a text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This apocalyptic document describes a coming battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and calls for exactly 500 men from each tribe to serve in the Holy Army. It reads, "The horsemen with the cavalry of the men of the entire army will be 6,000, 500 to a tribe." Now in the book of Revelation, 12,000 per tribe far exceeds that, but the structure is similar. A divinely organized fighting force drawn evenly from all tribes of Israel. And just like Revelation, the war scroll ties war readiness to sexual abstinence. One passage instructs that soldiers must refrain from sex while on campaign, and no man shall go down with them on the day of battle who is impure because of his fount, for the holy angels shall be with their hosts. And yeah, fount means what you think it means. In this worldview, celibacy was not about personal piety or asceticism. It was a practical requirement for joining the ranks of God's army. Revelation may be picking up on the same logic. The 144,000 are symbolic warriors, ritually pure and tribally organized. As David Frankfurter notes, Revelation's brief glorification of celibacy in chapter 14 verse 4, paired with its later reference to the camp of the saints in Revelation 20, echoes the holy war regulations found in the Qumran scrolls. In both cases, sexual purity, military readiness, and divine presence all converge. It's part of a larger vision of the end times where God's army must be pure because the holy angels shall be with their hosts. In fact, some scholars argue that the phrasing, who have not defiled themselves with women in Revelation chapter 14 does not just reflect standard purity laws like those found in Deuteronomy 23, the laws about sexual fluids. Instead, it might echo the myth of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, a group of angels who descended from heaven, took human wives, and were punished for corrupting the created order. In that story, sexual union between women and angels is portrayed as a cosmic violation, so the implication in Revelation may be that the 144,000 are angelic in nature, holy warriors set apart from ordinary humanity, and like the angels, their purity is threatened by contact with women. Many Christians at this time were embracing apocalyptic celibacy, which the Apostle Paul addresses himself in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. But there's still one major question remaining. Are these 144,000 people meant to be understood as ethnically Jewish, or is this tribal language symbolic? Revelation 7 lists 12,000 people from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, seemingly pointing to a literal Jewish identity. And some early Christian writers did seem to envision a group of Jews within Israel who would be saved during the end times. Take the Apostle Paul. In Romans 9:27, he quotes a line from the prophet Isaiah, "Though the number of the people of Israel be like the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will be saved." See, in this chapter, Paul is writing about his frustration that so many Jews have rejected Jesus as the Messiah, and he interprets the passage in Isaiah as saying that only a limited number of them will be saved. This might indicate an early Christian interpretation that the 144,000 are this faithful remnant of Jewish followers of Jesus. And some early Christian theologians did argue this, including the 3rd century author Victorinus and the 6th century author Oecumenius. Oecumenius refers to the 144,000 as those of the Jews worthy of being saved. This very well may be what John of Patmos had in mind. John was not just dabbling in Jewish ideas. His entire theological agenda is steeped in Jewish apocalyptic and priestly traditions. In fact, the scholar David Frankfurter argues that we should not look at Revelation as a Christian text with Jewish attributes, but rather as a Jewish text that reveals a heavenly Christ. It is a text with a fundamentally Jewish framework. When you read between the lines, John's emphasis on celibacy, dietary regulation, and moral separation places his approach to Jewish law much closer to the world of the Qumran sectarians than to the Apostle Paul. For example, we see John's view of dietary laws most clearly in his harsh criticism of certain Christians in Revelation chapter 2, when he condemns those who eat food sacrificed to idols. For John, this is apparently a serious violation of Jewish ritual purity, but the Apostle Paul is much more lenient in his attitude toward idol meat, even allowing its consumption under certain circumstances. Personally, I don't think John of Patmos and Paul would have gotten along. John's view of the end times also revolves around the restoration of the tribes of Israel, much like what we see in Ezekiel chapter 37, in which God promises to reunite the divided tribes of Israel into one nation. Even John's image of the 144,000 as celibate virgins may reflect priestly purity rules found in Exodus chapter 19 and 1 Samuel chapter 21. In both texts, abstaining from sex is temporarily required before encountering the divine or handling holy objects. So John's strong emphasis on Jewish identity and Jewish ritual purity may shape how we interpret who the 144,000 actually are. If the book of Revelation is rooted in a thoroughly Jewish apocalyptic worldview, one that longs for the restoration of Israel's tribes, values priestly ethnic purity and mirrors Qumran-style sectarianism, then it becomes far more plausible that John meant what he said: 12,000 Jews, each from the 12 tribes of Israel. Rather than reading this group as a symbolic stand-in for all Christians, we could seriously consider that John envisioned a literal contingent of Jewish Christ believers, set apart, sealed, and prepared for the final divine showdown. On the other hand, some Christians believe that the group symbolized the Gentile church, what was sometimes called a spiritual Israel. According to this view, God's covenant had shifted away from ethnic Israel and now rested with the Christian community. Scholars refer to this idea as supersessionism or replacement theology, the belief that the church has replaced Israel as God's chosen people. One of the clearest examples of this comes from Origen of Alexandria, a 3rd century theologian known for his often allegorical interpretations of Scripture. In his commentary on the Gospel of John, Origen writes, "The number of believers is small who belong to Israel according to the flesh. One might venture to assert that they would not nearly make up the number of 144,000. It is clear, therefore, that the 144,000 must be made up of those who have come to the divine word out of the Gentile world." So despite his usual habit to read the scriptures allegorically, Origen's reasoning here is oddly literal. In his mind, there's just not enough Jewish Christians out there to fill out the number 144,000, thus the number must refer to Gentile believers. Some modern scholars argue that the 144,000 are not defined primarily by ethnicity at all. The scholar David Oney, for example, sees them as a remnant of protected Christians, regardless of ethnicity. Their role is to serve as witnesses to Jesus during the unfolding end times events, ensuring that the number of the elect will not be cut off, and that a faithful remnant endures through the chaos. Dr. Oney sees strong parallels with Jewish apocalyptic texts like 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch, where the last generation of the faithful is protected in the land of Israel as the end times unfold. For example, 4th Ezra chapter 13 speaks of a remnant surviving in the land of Israel. "But those who are left of your people, who are found within my holy borders, shall be saved." He also points to a text from the Dead Sea Scrolls which describes a divinely preserved remnant. But recalling the covenant with the first ones, he left a remnant of Israel and did not give them up to destruction. For Dr. Oney, the number 144,000 is symbolic and represents the new people of God, protected, preserved, and poised for the final battle. He says they're an eschatological army of those who keep the commandments of God and follow the Lamb, granted divine immunity from suffering and death. Okay, so those are some of the ancient interpretations of the 144,000, but what about today? The identity of this group has continued to spark intense speculation among modern Christians. One of the most interesting interpretations comes from the Jehovah's Witnesses, a non-Trinitarian and millenarian denomination formed in the late 19th century, who are famous for their door-to-door evangelism. They believe that 144,000 committed Christians, and only 144,000 have been selected to be resurrected in heaven as eternal spirits, and will spend eternity with God. Sometimes called the anointed class, Jehovah's Witnesses claim these Christians are specially selected by God to lead the spiritual Israel. They will serve with Christ as king priests for 1,000 years, while all other people accepted by God will have the chance to live eternally as their subjects in a kind of paradisal kingdom on earth. Other interesting interpretations emerge from dispensationalism, a 19th century theological system that remains very popular among many American evangelical circles. Dispensationalists typically read Revelation as a blueprint for future events, believing that the book outlines a chronological timeline of the end times. According to this framework, history is divided into distinct dispensations, or eras in God's plan, and we're currently in the church age. Eventually, the faithful will be raptured, after which a 7-year period called the tribulation will begin. In the Left Behind series, a cornerstone of dispensationalist prophecy fiction, the 144,000 are taken as a literal number and interpreted ethnically. Exactly 144,000 ethnically Jewish individuals who convert to Christianity, and then are sent out by God to evangelize the world during the tribulation. Other modern evangelicals reject literal or ethnic interpretations altogether. Instead, they argue that the whole idea of 144,000 sealed individuals just refers to the entire global body of believers, the same group described in Revelation 7 as the great multitude that no one could count. For example, Kevin DeYoung, a Reformed pastor in the Conservative Presbyterian Church in America, rejects both the dispensationalist view and the Jehovah's Witnesses view. He writes the 144,000 are not an ethnic Jewish remnant and certainly not an anointed class of saints. The 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel represent the entire community of the redeemed. In his view, the number 144,000 is simply a symbolically gigantic number representing wholeness, the totality of God's people across space and time. But again, if we place Revelation in its Jewish apocalyptic context, especially alongside texts like the War Scroll from Qumran, they seem to be a battle-ready holy remnant of Jews. Like the Sons of Light in the War Scroll, they stand on the side of God in the final showdown. Their symbolic number, tribal structure, and ritual purity mark them as a kind of spiritual army, mobilized for the end times drama that Revelation lays out. We've already seen how John sets the 144,000 against the beast's followers, marked with the mysterious number 666. Well, it was not particularly mysterious to the original audience. It was a numerical cipher for the notorious Roman Emperor Nero, whose cruelty and excess became legendary, and as bad as Nero was, he's just one name in a long list of unhinged rulers. That's exactly what real-life lore explores in his new Nebula series, Mad Kings, the most eccentric and dangerous leaders of the modern era. The first episode just dropped, focusing on Uday Hussein, the son of Saddam Hussein, whose violent excesses made him one of the most feared men in Iraq. And the series just doesn't tell you what happened, it unpacks the psychology and politics that shaped these rulers and their worlds. And it's available only on Nebula, the streaming platform built by and for independent creators. Mad Kings is a Nebula original. These are our biggest and most ambitious projects, and originals are exclusive only to Nebula, so you won't find them anywhere else. These are projects where creators get the time, budget, and freedom to make something truly special. We have competition shows like Jet Lag the Game, where creators race around the world playing high-stakes versions of Tag, Hide and Seek, and Capture the Flag. We have documentaries like Tom Nicholas's Boomers, which unpacks how a single generation shaped the modern world, and science series like Becoming Human, which explores how our species evolved and what makes us unique. You can watch all of these amazing Nebula originals by signing up using my link nebula.tv/for breakfast. That will get you 40% off an annual subscription, which works out to just be $36 a year or $3 a month. And if you'd rather skip monthly payments altogether, there's also a lifetime membership for $300. Pay once and you'll have unlimited access to all of it forever. It's really an amazing deal. Again, that's nebula.tv/for breakfast. Thanks, everyone.